Boom, boom, ba-da-da.
If you ever see the boy from me, tell him that I love him. Tell him that I care.
Good evening. Welcome to a special edition of the Queen's Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. Tonight in the Queen's Grapevine, we want to talk about the New York City education system. As you know, the education system in New York is probably one of the largest in the United States of America. And tonight on this program, we want to talk a little bit about the importance of education for children who happens to be the man and woman of tomorrow. More importantly, how does the framework of this system work? More important, are our children's learning? Are they really learning? We want to talk a little bit about the preparation of teachers. We want to talk about the way how the Bloomberg administration really attacked the teachers and for a while. And more importantly, what does the curriculum means? And more importantly, whether the parents of children are involved into the curriculum. So, you know, these are a little bit complex questions to a certain extent, but important things that we need to talk about because you as a parent need to be involved in with your child. You need to know if your child is learning, whether your child can read properly and stuff like that, and where do you go for help? And we want to talk a little bit also about the PTA. So, you know, we feel gracious again to have as our special guest someone that's been on our program many times, and the reason why we have it on one more time is because your audience have asked for him, because he has given us crisp and to the point answers and issues without taking a back seat to anything. I'm talking about my friend and my special guest, Jaime State. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah. Always a pleasure.
Well, you know, you have done a wonderful job. We did so many different programs. We did a couple of programs on poverty. We talked about the Mandela. We've done some great shows with you that has been really, really, truly well received, not only in the New York area, because we send our videos out to North Carolina, to Georgia, and we're also on YouTube. So a lot of people call, say, well, how come you don't have him on anymore? So we want to tackle the New York system in New York. What do you think is the legal frame of the New York City education in your estimation?
Well,
the setup in terms.
I think right now is a light of hope, great, compared to what happened during the last 12 years in New York City. A little bit of history. During the last 12 years, the Bloomberg administration focused basically on privatizing the public education system in New York City. In a nutshell, that's what he did. He never had an educator running the Department of Education. First, he had Klein, who was a lawyer who didn't know anything about education. And all he did was to privatize different departments and aspects and contractors and subcontractors that they had, making business with friends of the administration.
Because they were running like a business.
It was a business, and that was the business model that Bloomberg came to the city of New York. That's how he thought, and that's how he operated, and he made the public school system, not a public school system, but a privatized school system, and with people who didn't have any background or expertise in education. My children, and I'm talking now as a parent, they started school during that period of time. And it was awful.
So you lived it?
It was awful for all the parents and especially for the children. There were tests that the city contracted in which they paid hundreds of millions of dollars that were located outside the United States, that didn't understand the United States.
Wow.
And only to make business. You could see all the different businesses in the listings of contractors that they had, that the city had never used. After Klein leaves, he brings a lady.
Miss Black.
Miss Black.
That was the biggest disaster.
Well, Klein was a disaster. Klein was awful. Klein didn't care about the parents at all. He never, if there was a town hall meeting that he had to go,
then he went.
I remember going to town hall meetings with him in which he just looked at the watch all the time.
Wow.
And people boo him and cheer him because he didn't want to be there, didn't want to answer questions. Then he brings this lady after 8 years of Klein, who is in marketing, is in public relations.
And knew nothing about the education system.
A millionaire. And so he was accommodating his friends And it was awful. Someone said at one point, I remember in one town hall meeting, someone compared that decision to decision that Caligula made when he appointed his horse to the Senate in Rome. And he said that that decision was better than the decision of having Miss Black as Chancellor of the Board of Education. I mean, that's how ridiculous. And when he said that, I agree with you. I didn't even laugh. I said, that's a very accurate example. And the children, I mean, there are studies now that are very clear that the children that graduated during that period of time from high school are taking remedial courses in college.
Wow.
Because they're having difficulties in reading, in writing,
grasping things.
And then there was this huge attack against the UFT. Because if anything that was wrong, it was the teachers. Now, as a parent, I have had my issues with some teachers. Because there are teachers that are good, there are teachers that are bad, but the majority of the teachers are very good and dedicated teachers. I have relationships still to this day with many teachers who educated my children. But it was relentless. It was, this mentality of eliminating unions, like a good business person that they want to do that. So anyway, the thing is that it was awful. Now we have finally an educator running the Department of Education in New York City, and he's day and night. It's completely different.
But you need to know, it's important that we're talking about this education matter. Bloomberg wanted to be known as the mayor of education. And it seems to me that I think he did a lot of good things in New York City, but his last term was totally downhill. Where would you say is the state of how he left the state of the education system in New York? A mess?
In shambles. In shambles. People who don't have children in the public school system that were there during that period of time, they know how awful it was. The thing is that we have three educational systems. We have the one for the east side with the rich people, public school system. No charter schools. You have never seen a white rich parent in the east side of New York or the west side asking for a charter school. Why? Because the public school system in rich neighborhoods are so good that you don't need
any charter schools.
Okay. And then you have the public school system for everybody else, which is, especially under Bloomberg, which is completely mediocre or poor. And then you have another tier, which is the charter schools that he brought specifically for the bad where the bad schools were, in order to privatize the school. Those charter schools basically privatize that system.
So now, he had a purpose.
It had a purpose. It was a business purpose. It was not about remedying anything, because if you have good public schools, it should be across the board. It should be across the board. So he was managing three different systems, and he didn't care because it was working for him. And all these favors, political favors that he did, basically helping. This is someone that basically began with $7 billion as mayor of the city of New York, more or less. And ended up with $17 billion, even when he wasn't supposed to be in the business that he had. He had to separate both things. He couldn't work as a businessman. But any billionaire that comes to politics, the history tells you that once they get elected, the business that they left increased dramatically.
Well, one of the things that I found difficult with him in his last administration, I have to say, is his attack on the teachers. I want to be the first to say that being a teacher is a very difficult job. Two of my sisters are teachers, and my wife is a teacher also. So I know and I see what they come home with, because they care for the kids and they want to educate the children. And I know there are excellent teachers, there are mediocre teachers, and there are bad teachers. So I believe in two things: reward those that are good teachers, and those that doesn't fit the situation, you might move them out. Let's talk a little bit. Where does the teachers them stand? What is their responsibilities, in your estimation, of teachers with the children?
Well, they have the biggest responsibility in any society, the biggest. You're educating the future of that nation. You're educating the future of that country. Why is it that you get paid so little compared to a baseball player, compared to a basketball player. That is only entertainment. And I love basketball and I love baseball. I love entertainment. But why is it the discrepancy that is so huge? And then the criticism is so large too, when they're trying to do the best they can. They are bad basketball players, they are bad baseball players, and they make millions of dollars. They are crooks in Wall Street, and they get all these bonuses, and they don't go to jail. Now, there is a teacher that most of the time, I remember some of the teachers that my children had, my daughter had, that they put their own money to buy materials for the school. Because they were in the poor neighborhood. They were not getting the resources that they get in the east side of Manhattan. They had to put their own money and they make the sacrifices. Was anyone taking the account on that?
No.
They were not. So it's completely abusive. It's basically blaming the victim. And then you find a bad apple and then you try to portray that bad apple like it's representative of the whole educational system and the union, etc. So, and people, the press also helps to propagate
things.
that type of mentality, because the media is also business. Bill de Blasio, he was very good in education before he became mayor. So he's someone that understands education. But he's not an expert in education. The expert in education are the teachers, are the educators. You want to have that input in terms of what is going to be taught in the classroom. It's not only about getting better salaries. They have to say a lot about what happened in that classroom. As a matter of fact, you cannot do any type of educational remedies or new approaches to education unless you count with teachers. You cannot have only politicians making those policies without the input
of the teachers.
So it's more, the union can help more than bringing better salaries and better benefits to the teachers, but also to help the public system as a whole.
When we get back on the Queen's Grapevine, we're going to continue talking about the education system of New York City, which happens to be large, but more importantly, we want to talk about technology in the classroom. We want to talk about the responsibility of teachers, and we also want to talk about the responsibility of you, the parent, whether you work with your child at night, homework, whether you prepare your child before going to school. Don't think the entire responsibility is only the teacher. It is also your responsibility to prepare your child, to work with your child, to make sure he gets the proper education. We'll be right back on the Grapevine as we continue forward.
11 years ago, she entered first grade. He entered City Hall. And while she's changed a lot, he hasn't. It's still his way or the highway, whatever the cost. Going after teachers again, instead of helping them improve our schools. It's time for the mayor to put politics aside and agree to a fair evaluation system that gives teachers the support they need to help kids succeed. That's the way to move our schools and our city forward.
And we're back here in the Queen's Grapevine as we continue talking about the largest education system here, which happens to be the one in New York City, the complexity of it, the complexity of the education system, the responsibility of the teachers, the responsibility as you as a parent, and the responsibility as a student also when they get to a certain age, in terms of, we're talking about paying attention in class, studying, doing the homework and doing the things that you have to do to get to the next level, and also being responsible. So, in the first half we talked a little bit about the union, we talked about the teachers and what the expectation they have for them. Now we want to talk a little bit about the technology in class and also the curriculum. How important technology is to classwork and teaching?
Well, it's extremely important because, as you know, in society, everything that we do is basically catching up with technology. We have the iPhone, for example. My daughters, they look at the old telephones that we used to use just like 15 years ago, and they don't understand it. How did that work? Outdated. And the thing is that every year technology keeps changing, keep advancing, etc. And if our children cannot keep up with that in school, then they're going to be at a disadvantage when they are adult. The whole idea of education is the main idea is basically to put our children in a position in which they can participate in the economy of the country. And if that is the main goal, then they have to be attuned with what is happening in terms of technological advancement. The teachers, they need to have all those resources. There are many schools still in the city of New York that don't have PowerPoints, that they don't have the technological resources that they need in order to catch up. And I hope that things are going to start changing now with the new administration. And like I said before, the new chancellor is aware of those things. So it's extremely important, because if you don't dominate, if you don't master that technology in the classroom, you're going to be at a disadvantage once you graduate from high school and you go to college.
You won't be prepared.
You're going to be lost in college, and you are going to be lost also in terms of if you go to the business sector or to work. So that is extremely important.
How important it was to pick a person like Farina, who has the background, who seems to have the knowledge, because she was a teacher. She was in the system for many years. I think she's a little bit up in age, but that's good because she has the experience and background. How important it was to pick a person like Ms. Farina? And what do you think she brings to the table that will make a huge difference to our educational system and to our children today?
Well, she was a teacher, she was a superintendent, she was a principal, now she's the chancellor of the city of New York. She knows the whole system from the beginning to the middle to the end. Very difficult to find someone with more experience.
And the qualification.
Not only that, she is also a college professor in education. So in any aspect that you want to challenge her or basically see how much she can bring to the table, you will find that she can bring a lot. And that's exactly what we needed before. Also from New York. So she knows the city of New York, and she understands the public school system of New York City. Before, and not only Bloomberg, other mayors brought people from outside New York, which, sometimes you have to give them a little bit of leeway because...
But it takes them a while to get in flow with
exactly.
things.
So she knows the system, and I think that she hit the ground running. So people seems to be extremely happy. Also, she doesn't have the headache of having to deal now with the contract that we talked before, that the monies that they were owed to the UFT, etc., that has been taken off the table. Therefore, now she has the time to dedicate 100% to education. When she was appointed, I remember this anecdote. When Bush got elected for the first time, President Bush, and I think that I shared with you once, he couldn't articulate a sentence or two. Now, I have an accent. I shouldn't be talking too much of that. But Bush, he couldn't put together a thought. When Obama became president, and he has his first conference as president, you saw a new world.
He can speak.
Now you see what the president is thinking. This is exactly what happened when Farina became chancellor of the public school system in New York City. Finally, in the first press conference, you saw someone educated who understood the system, who understood education, and who could deliver. And I was talking to parents, and they said, wow, what a fresh air. Everything has changed. Finally, we're talking about education. Because the 12 years before that was the biggest disaster in the history of education in the city of New York.
And that's good to know. Like I said, education is a very key component and a very powerful the component. The matter of fact, getting good parents, that's the one thing that you want to do, is concentrate in giving your child the proper education to prepare he or she for the day of tomorrow and for the new technologies. And as a child or as a grown person or a man, that the challenges that they will have in the future. America has changed so much that right now, if you're not prepared for the day of tomorrow, you are going to get left back. Let's talk a little bit about the curriculum. Are parents in the school system involved into the curriculum in any way whatsoever?
Well, I don't know exactly how they are handling that situation before, but I can tell you that, now, but before, parents were completely out of any aspects of the educational system that was basically serving their children. They had these CECs, the Community Educational Councils, in which parents went there, they make suggestions, make criticisms, And at the end of the meeting, everybody left and nothing happened with that.
No.
Parents were completely out, no decision making. They were completely out of the process. I think that now parents are part of that system.
And that's important.
And also, the thing with curriculum is that depends a lot on experts, just to be fair. And for example, I'm a parent, and I care very much about the education of of my children, but at the same time, I don't have that expertise to talk about a curriculum for a child in first grade, second grade, middle school, high school, because we are busy. So, but that doesn't mean that we don't have ideas. We know something that parents know well is that we know when something is wrong. When something
you can sense it.
When something is not working out correctly, and when the children are struggling with things that they shouldn't be struggling. So I think that we are more an alarm. We are the ones that raises the red flag, and that's where we are the ones that make accountable that curriculum and that system. And those who have expertise in those areas, well, they can contribute more than other parents. But you cannot expect parents to have that
knowledge,
expertise in terms of how to put together the best curriculum. I'm talking in general. Some do, because I have met many who know more than,
has the knowledge
than I
and
do.
stuff like that. Let's talk a little bit about the PTA. How important that is?
Well, the PTA is extremely important because that's the relationship. That's where the relationship between the school, the parents, and the children come together. So PTAs are extremely important because there is a participation of the parents that is constantly, not only when you have the meeting, it's also when you go to the schools and find out or follow up with the decisions that we're making in the PTA with the schools, what they are doing, what they are not doing. That direct relationship is extremely important. There are places that are being gentrified now, and there's a lot of clashes because there are parents that work at home, those that gentrify, etc. So they have more time to go to schools, and then they criticize minority parents because they don't go to the schools, they don't go to the PTA. But that's wrong because the thing is that more minority parents, they have sometimes 2-3 jobs. It's very difficult for them to go to every PTA meeting. And what you have is these parents that come at 5, that have regular hours, or they work at home, they're spending a little more time in schools, and they're trying to shape the schools basically for their children. And what you see, something that this public school system in New York City has to pay attention, is about the effects of gentrification in the schools. Because there is a lot of tension and clashes when one group comes and they don't understand the situation of the other group.
Of what's taking place.
Yes. And it's reflected in the PTA meetings.
There's no question about it. It's very sensitive on also the lack of involvement of some who come, as Jenna come lately and want to have a say, but they miss all the other meetings and involvement that took place.
And sometimes, and I have to be very honest, sometimes they recommend policies that segregate children in the schools because they want their children separate. Not all of them, but I have been in those situations.
So you know when you feel it.
And what you don't want is the school system to be gentrified.
No.
And I think that this is something that de Blasio and Farina have to pay attention, because usually people are afraid to talk about that.
And it's a very sensitive thing that should be brought to the table because it's a collision. If you don't deal with these type of things, it can come back and harm in so many different ways.
Yeah, sometimes the children are in the PTA meeting in which you see these clashes. And, you know, as a child, you say, well, I thought that we were going to talk about math or what the teacher said in social studies. And now this is about, well, we want our own classrooms. We want the classroom for our children because we don't think that education that the children are getting in the school is at that level.
A level.
You know.
When you talk about level, bring a very sensitive matter. Are our students today on par with, let's say, the European children or
no,
children?
I can tell you right now before you finish.
You don't think we are?
It's completely different. Even the treatment that they have for teachers They have more hours to prepare. They get better pay. The children have more time in physical education. They have more time in socializing. In Europe, what they are creating is basically a human being, a complete human being that can produce in society.
A good package.
A good package. In the United States, the trend during the last 12, 15 years is to create a potential businessman.
Well, good. We have approximately a minute. It's not fair. But how do we fix it so we can get our children up to that level to do the right thing and get the right education so that they can produce properly? How do we do that?
It's a matter of a political will. It's a matter of a political will. We have in Congress right now Republicans, Tea Party, that are into that philosophy. That is basically a business type of philosophy in which government, city, state, and federal government should stay out of things like education. Leave that to the state. Let them decide how the education is going to take place, and let these business models to come to the school. Is laissez-faire. Stay out of it, and let the corporations come and educate our children and implant those policies instead of creating a good human being. It's happening in universities. It's happening in colleges. Wow. The universities are not the same that they used to be because now they have business models. And we're not creating a complete human being, a package, like you said. In Europe, people pay more taxes in order to make sure that the quality of life for everybody is more equal. What we have in the United States in terms of education now is put more money in order to see who survived this jungle in education, in businesses, and those that don't survive, they are on their own. And that is being reflected in the public schools.
And they're left behind.
Yeah, and it's being reflected in the colleges. If you cannot make it, you are out. If you don't have a business mentality, but you have a social studies mentality, you have a philosophy mentality, you have an art mentality, you are out of that picture in the public school system and the universities. And it's by design.
Very sad, very sad. And that strong note, I want to take the opportunity on behalf of the family of Grapevine to thank you so much for imparting your knowledge and your feelings about the education system. I think it's very important. A lot of things that you brought up there are very sensitive, very strong. We appreciate you being our guest on this program.
No, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Good.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, education is something with name power. It's difficult for me to understand that our children today are not on par in terms of education with the European children or any children in any part of the world. America is the strongest power in the world, in my estimation. We need to bring up that level and conquer the situation like we have always have in the past. Let's be strong. Let's educate our kids. Let's do whatever we have to do to implement those changes to make sure our children are learning. And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night for the Queens of Grapevine. And see you next week at the same time at the same place. Good night.
Boom, boom, ba-da-da.
If you ever see